something might happen in the meantime that would listen to the fact that there isn't anything happening at 2:30. So I would say stay alert just in case. I don't really know, but right now the default is we're back on the floor at 2:30. Possible that could be pushed back too. I've seen that happen at 2:30. Actually, no, it's going to be 8:30 or something.
It's Friday.
It is a beautiful Friday. Yeah. In fact. Yes. So, however.
Suck it up, Buttercup, that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And then we are not, as usual, we're not here tomorrow, and we're not here Monday. There'll be a token session on Monday, which only means that the calendar moves up a day faster. So anything that's voted out of the committee today normally takes 2 days. It goes on notice the next day, and then. But technically now Monday is that first day. So anything that's voted out of a committee today could be second reading on Tuesday.
But also, like this time of year, if both sides of the aisle agreed, you could, do away with rules and just start moving bills.
Perhaps quite a bit. I remember, towards the end of the session, that bills that are where there's agreement to suspend the rules, right? That will move things along. So this morning we're going to hear some more testimony on S115, and then we'll see where we are at 12, and we'll break for lunch, and planning to come back at 1 to take some more testimony on cannabis cultivation as it relates to statute defining farming and agriculture. And there's a bill as mentioned on the agenda, H270, that the Senate has that may come back with some amendments that possibly involve us. So that's just by way of some background. But why don't we get started? Dylan Zwicky is going to be joining us at the table. Good morning. I don't know that we've all met you, Dylan. So maybe we should just go around the table and have a quick introduction.
Sure, that'd be great.
I'll start, I guess. I'm David Durfee. You probably know who we are, but David Durfee. I represent Shaftesbury, Glastonbury, and Sunderland down in Bennington County.
Heather Supernant, I represent Windsor 4, which are towns of Barnard, Pomfret, and Bridgewater.
Esme Cole, represent Windsor 6, Hartford.
John O'Brien, represent Royalton and Tucker.
Mike Grace, Bennington Urban District, Danby, Dorset, Landgrove, Mount Shaker.
Josie Levitt, Grandel Chittenden, all of Grandel County, and West Milton.
David Templeman, Orleans 3, Brownington, Barton, and Westmore.
Chad Lipsky, Lamoille 1, Stowe.
Rodney Graham, Orange 3, Williamstown, Chelsea.
Thank you very much. For the record, Dylan Zwicky with Leonine Public Affairs, and it is my first time in this committee. Appearing today on behalf of the town of St. Albans on S115. I appreciate the committee taking the time to hear from me this morning. We did weigh in both the Senate Natural Resources Committee and the Senate Finance Committee when S115 was making its way through the Senate. I think we're in support of the Senate Finance Committee amendment, which would have directed the Department of Environmental Conservation, or ANR, to work in concert with Agency of Ag to determine sort of the appropriate relationship between MS4 communities or communities with stormwater utilities and those entities that are regulated by the Agency of Ag's required agricultural practices. We, for the record, we're not supportive of the 1-year pause in the collection of stormwater fees while that work is being done. The town of St. Albans is an MS4 community. We anticipate that the expected capital outlay over the next 10 or so years is in the order of $15 or $16 million to meet our MS4 obligations that are put upon the community by the state, clean up our waterways. So just kind of taking a step back, town of St. Albans has had a stormwater utility since the fall of 2020. There are a couple of benefits to having a stormwater utility. One, it provides a stable, dedicated source of funding for water quality improvements. The revenue is predictable, and municipalities can generate the revenue as needed to invest in stormwater projects. It is also equitable. It's an all-in approach, whether you're a church, school, a town highway, a town property, or a agricultural parcel. Everyone pays in based on the amount of impervious surface that they have. There are opportunities to reduce your obligation to the town. For example, the agriculture for stormwater agricultural credit is a one-page fee, a one-page form. Anyone who is regulated under an RAP can fill out this form, and they automatically receive a 35% credit in recognition of the activity that they take under the RAPs. But significantly under the proposal, nobody is fully exempt from paying in to the town's stormwater obligations. And that's because even if you're taking steps on your property to minimize your impact to stormwater concerns, everyone is using the town roads, everyone has some level of impact, and we believe everyone should pay in to the community's needs to clean up their waterways. Just for some perspective, because I think you had heard from the city of Burlington on their stormwater utility, ours instead of an ISU, we also have a similar unit. It's an equivalent residential unit. It's based on the sort of ERU is based on the average size of a single family home, about 3,500 square feet impervious surface. And for each ERU, it's $50 annually. So if you're a single family home, you're paying roughly $50. For perspective, if we moved away from the all-in approach and away from a stormwater utility fee based on service and just address the sort of needed capital improvements through the town budget and the property tax, that individual homeowner would probably go from paying around $50 a year to about $276 for that particular obligation. So the basis on impervious surface is really important, and equally the all-in approach is significantly important. You know, being an MS4 community is an unfunded mandate from the states. Municipalities are limited in how they can raise revenue to address the obligations under their MS4 permit. Tying their hands behind their back by creating an exemption for farms and silviculture would require a sharp increase in the property tax or shift burden to other types of payers. And again, nobody's exempt. Even if you're exempt from property tax, you're still paying in because you have impervious surface. It's not based on usage. And so I'm looking at the amendment that's posted to the committee page from April 24th, draft 1.1. Section 9 would strike the Senate Section 9 and speaks to municipalities' ability to charge a fee under the subdivision for discharges. I think it's important to point out, as the witness from Burlington did the other day, that we're not charging for discharge. We're charging for impervious surface, and there is a difference here. So if the committee is going to move forward with this amendment, at least would recommend making some clarifying statements about what municipalities are actually charging for here. I think fundamentally we were concerned that once you start exempting individual types of parcel owners, the question becomes who's next, right? Does VTrans come in? They've already come to the legislature several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and asked for an exemption from stormwater utility fees. So we know that demand is out there. And I think it's really important that the committee upholds the all-in approach to paying for our stormwater mandates that come down through EPA and then to the MS4 permit in the state. So I think, on balance, while we disagree with the 1-year pause that is included in the Senate passed version of the bill, if the committee is concerned about the differing sort of legal interpretations about what a fee is and what a fee is not, is it regulation, is it not regulation, the directive to the relevant agencies, the agency tasked with making sure that our waterways are clean, and the agency tasked with overseeing agricultural practices come together, come up with a recommendation about how this should be handled. This seems like a fairly blunt instrument to deal with a probably complex policy solution. I did just want to take a minute to talk about the question of whether a fee is regulation. I think we've are happy to look for a countering legal memo that would back that up. But just on its face, I think, we're not dictating how anyone practices their business or operates their own parcel. So we're not regulating their activity. We're actually not even saying that this fee is tied to the amount of discharge, again, that's coming off of their property. We're just saying you have a certain amount of impervious surface and your fee is based on that. And I think I would fundamentally disagree that a fee is regulation. There are plenty of entities that are subject to fees and taxes, and I don't think anyone would say that just because you can assess a lien on a particular property that is a regulation. All types of payers pay electrical, utility fees, access to sewer, and does not exempt them just because they're a particular type of parcel owner.
Representative Graham.
So on a homeowner property, let's just say it got a 24 by 34 house, single story, 25 feet from the road. And then we got a property that's 60 by 100 house with a 3-bay garage and a storage shed in the back, 250 feet from the road. Two properties get assessed the same.
They get assessed on the equivalent residential unit, which is based on the impervious surface. So each ERU is 3,500 square feet. So if the one property owner had less than 3,500 square feet, they would pay a lower fee than a property owner that may have more impervious surface.
And that's in St. Albans.
That's in the town of St. Albans.
And it's done differently in different townships.
Yeah, each municipality has their own water quality needs, their own obligations under their MS4 permits. And so they have chosen to go about it in different ways. I heard testimony from the city of Burlington that they may exempt their town highways or their municipal roads. We don't do that in St. Albans. Every single parcel pays in an all-in approach.
Representative Levitt.
Can you tell me how many farms, it's 28 farms in St. Albans town, correct?
I believe there are 6 active farms in the town of St. Albans.
How much are they being charged a year? What's the revenue? Because we've heard between 80 and 100,000.
Yeah, so the annually the town of St. Albans collects roughly $500,000 in revenue through the stormwater utility fee. If you were to exempt farms subject to the RIPs, that would drop by about 80,000.
Representative Templeton.
So it's about 80,000 a year that you're collecting from those 6 farms.
I've been told that there are 6 active farms in the town of St. Albans.
Are there any other farm entities that are being included in that 80,000 collection?
Not in the 80,000. The
They're-
6 goes to the 80,000. I think the others are not active farms and are therefore are being charged based on their impervious surface, but would not be exempt even under the language proposed here.
So that's $13,000 a farm.
On average, yes.
Oh, wow, okay, that's a lot. And then are you charging them as the farm, and then you're also charging them for their single family home that's on the farmstead? So are they getting hit, or is it all combined?
I think I would have to go back and look at the numbers. I don't know whether the 80,000 includes, I mean, if they have a single family homestead, maybe call it 1 ERU, that would be $50. So, plus or minus $50 potentially, but would have to go get additional information for you.
Representative Graham.
So I know you mentioned active farms, so there's a farm, that building is still there, but they have no animals. They still get charged on those buildings.
They're charged, every parcel owner, regardless of whether they're a farm or not, is charged based on their impervious surface.
I just feel like I just need to address something here. So the language you used was uphold the all-in approach, but there isn't an all-in approach to begin with if, in fact, the agency's interpretation of this is as it is. So, and then making exemptions being a slippery slope, that you didn't use that language, but we're not making an exemption. I think it's already in the law. the way that it's been presented to us. So, I mean, I just had to put that out there because it feels a little bit like spin a little bit to me. I think that's it.
Representative O'Brien, but I wanted to be, and we'll take as many questions as people have. And then if you had more to say too, we want to be sure to give, well, as long as you,
Happy to.
we have as much time as you need. Yeah. Representative O'Brien.
Dylan, we were trying to yesterday figure out how these MS4 municipalities sort of come up with the budget to deal with their stormwater mitigation obligations.
Yep.
So in St. Albans town, how does that work? You mentioned, what was the figure, like 14 million or something?
Yeah, so we estimate the total capital outlay between now and 2036, which is when we are required by the state to address the challenges identified in the MS4 permit, to be about $15 million.
2036.
2036.
Okay.
And so a certain amount has to be done a year or a 5-year plan or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So once that number's established, are the fees somehow connected to that? Like essentially you want to raise as much as the work budget is?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so they have sort of a broad plan to get them to 2036. They obviously can't invest $15 million right up front. And so they develop a capital plan on an annual basis. The fee is set in the actual stormwater utility handbook, but that can be updated based on the sort of needs. So, let's just say anticipated cost of concrete or, whatever the construction material is for some of these projects doubles, then they may need to take a look at the fee, but it's based on the anticipated capital expense on an annual basis. Yeah.
And that is when, say, that budget and those fees don't arrive at that number they need for 3-year plan, 5-year plan, whatever, do the municipalities or St. Albans Town, I guess I should be more specific, can they essentially raid the general fund to make up the difference? Or do they just not do the work and hope to catch up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. If the committee were to accept this amendment and it were to go into law and our revenues were to drop by $80,000, I'm not sure what the municipality's response would be. They could shift to just a pure property tax assessment. And so everyone would pay that. As I mentioned, the individual homeowner would see an increase, a significant increase over what they would pay under their ERU. To answer your question about the authority to go into the general fund, I'm not sure. I couldn't happy to follow up.
Okay. And one other thing is, go ahead.
But also, I think we did take testimony. I'm not sure if you've taken similar testimony. I did hear testimony in the Senate Finance Committee that there are a number of farms in St. Albans that have just chosen not to pay. So certainly the municipality will have to address the anticipated shortfall in that revenue for this current year.
Oh, I just remember. So you said it's all in, but the town itself, if you calculated their impervious surfaces from whether it's municipal garages to the streets, the town itself is paying into this fund, or is it just a payment in lieu of sort of thing?
My understanding is that the town gets a bill from itself for their impervious surface. They pay that, comes out of the general fund.
So that's raised by property taxes.
Yeah.
Representative Rice and then Representative Lipsky.
Do you know if, I understand that impervious surfaces is sort of the standard. Do you know if St. Albans considered other methods for assessing this when they?
I don't. I'm happy to follow up.
Yeah, it's just because it occurs to me, like I'm relatively moved by the idea of the all-in, I get that. But when homeowners are paying $50 and farms are paying $13,000, when farms are in fact already required to do a lot of mitigation work, that just doesn't seem like actually sort of equitable all-in. It seems like, farms are paying almost a fifth of the overall budget, 6 farms in town. And so it seems like the problem, it's like all in, sure, if it's if there's another way to assess it other than impervious surfaces, which clearly farms have a lot of, and, you know.
Well, I think it's reflective of the scale of their operations and relative to the scale of the individual homes. And I think we do take into account the work that they're already doing through this, which is not a huge barrier to get your 35% discount.
Right, but the 80,000, I'm assuming they all do that. So 80,000 is already with their 35%.
I don't know. Actually, I could go back and find out whether they've applied for that.
Okay, yeah, that'd be helpful.
How does a farm owner know about that application or the ability to apply for a credit or rebate?
Would be happy to get a copy of the sort of a mock-up bill that's sent out. I don't know if it's referenced there, but certainly, I found this just like on the town website. It was Town of St. Albans, 2 clicks for agricultural exemptions. Fairly easy to track down.
I think it would be, this has come up a couple of other times too. It would be good for the committee to know whether farmers are being made aware explicitly as they get the bill that they could apply for a credit. Sure. Or in some other way, actively.
Certainly would be a happy compromise to require any municipality that is assessing stormwater utility fee on any entity there. So there are a number of different opportunities to reduce your payment to the town. Ag is not the only one. And so I think it would be reasonable for the legislature to require that the town notify parcel owners of that opportunity.
So we've got Representative Lipsky, Representative Levitt, and then Representative Templeman.
As a remedy for non-payment on these stormwater fees, does the town actually attach a lien to that property?
I believe they would have the ability to do so. Whether the town of St. Albans has done that for the farms that have chosen not to pay this year, I don't know if they've taken that step.
But, you know, that's a very serious action. You know, any of us who own property and we fail to pay our taxes and with the municipal lien gets attached, it's sort of doomsday for your ability. It really boxes you into a corner. So most folks stand on their head, charge a credit card, sell their car, anything to pay those municipal taxes. So in the case of these impervious surface fees, if you have the power to attach a lien on the property on an issue that's really controversial in law, it seems excessive to me. So you used the term lien earlier today, and it sort of got my attention on that.
Understood. And I'm not making light of the assessment of a lien on anyone or non-payment of their tax obligation or fee obligation to the municipality in which they reside or operate. I would say the town has the ability to assess a lien on a property for non-payment of property taxes, as you pointed out. And so this is just one additional obligation that residents of communities are obligated to pay because of the obligations that are put on that community by the state and the EPA to clean up the waterways. I think if there is confusion or controversy around whether or not the existing statute perhaps already exempts, there are 2 pathways. One, someone could take the town to court and say you're in violation of the statute. One avenue, certainly. The other would be for the legislature to direct the relevant agencies to come back to the legislature and recommend a path forward that would avoid litigation. But I do think that the amendment currently on the committee's page sort of makes a predetermination that there is one right solution.
Representative Levitt.
Okay, so explain something to me. Each ERW is, ERU is 3,500 square feet.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm looking at, and I'm going to make my neighborhood St. Albans. I have a house that's probably 2,500 square feet. And it's just one building. My neighbor has 6 different outbuildings, probably all totaling maybe 5,000 square feet. Are they gonna get charged per roof? Because they have 6 different roofs. I only have one, but they have 6 that are contributing to their impervious surfaces.
Yes, so my understanding is that an ERU is sort of the average level of impervious surface for which the sort of set rate is $50. I will get you 100% confirmation. My understanding is that it is purely based on your impervious surface. So you have more impervious surface, whether you're a residential or a business parcel, you're paying based on your impervious surface.
And who's assessing that in St.
The
Albans?
town, it's the stormwater utility.
They go around and they inspect every single house.
I can follow up on the exact process.
And then my next question, my last question is, how many farms and what are the sizes of them? Because it's hard, we're hearing, originally we heard it was 28 farms in St. Albans town, and now I'm hearing that it's 6 active farms. So I would just like a little clarity on the number of farms and the sizes of the farms, because some houses these days are bigger than some very small farms.
Yeah.
I am happy to get you the list.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
I've lost track. Who's next?
I think.
Yeah, I've forgotten.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's been a while.
Back to you. You can raise your hand again.
Yeah.
John, did you have a hand up?
So just following up on my earlier question, what's the bill for St. Albans? They bill themselves.
Well, that's a good
I
question.
can get you that information as well.
Okay. And also, have they applied for the 35% credit themselves?
So they're not an agricultural parcel as far as I know, so they would not be eligible for this particular credit.
But can anybody else apply for that credit?
This is only for entities that are, this particular credit is only for entities that are regulated under the RIPs.
Do you know how many farms are using this credit in St. Albans?
It's on that list, that's true.
Okay, cool. Sorry.
So then one last question. I see that Interstate 89 runs through St. Albans town. So what happens with federal land that's impervious?
State or federal land?
Well, I don't know if you would assess AOT because of the interstate or if it's federal.
Well, I can make a leap and I'll look for confirmation from the town, but since V-Trans did come in and ask for an exemption from stormwater utility fees, I'm gonna assume that we assess them for their impervious surface.
With and 35% credit, right, is what they automatically get.
So there are a couple different eligible credits. Again, this is just for agricultural practice, presumably.
They get mandated statutory 35% again.
Representative Temple.
Yeah, so it's a 35% credit. Is it ever less or more?
So this for the agricultural credit is just 35%.
Okay, thank you.
Regardless of whether you're in compliance with the RIPs, I might add.
Oh, okay.
You do have to submit a copy, but I think that's every 7 years. Correct.
Oh, for update.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Anybody else have a hand up? Representative Supernath.
Sorry, I feel like I missed that last part. Did you say regardless of whether or not you were in compliance with the RIPs?
Well, so my understanding is that Agency of Ag has a 7-year schedule for their RIP compliance. So you could be in compliance at that particular point, but then in any future year. And I know there are municipalities that have considered whether or not to provide a similar exemption. I think the town of Colchester had looked at that and ultimately determined because they don't actually have faith that the RIPs are enforced and that those parcels that are subject to the RIPs are actually sort of meeting the intention of the RIPs, so they don't provide the similar credit.
And 7 years is for a medium farm and it's annually for large farm operations, right?
Are the farms in?
For a small farm, and it's all certified, and it's every 3 per meeting. I think.
This is, so we're getting into technical ground here, Dylan. Do you know whether the 6 farms, how the 6 farms are classified in St. Albans town?
I do not know.
As large or medium?
I can get that as well.
If you want to add that to the list.
It's a long list.
Yeah.
Sorry, buddy.
That's okay. That's my job.
Just while we're talking about the list, you did say that your understanding anyway is that some of the farms are in arrears. Did you say that? We were talking about it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so in the Senate Finance Committee, there were two towns from the two farms from the town of St. Albans. Both, I believe, testified that they had received a utility assessment and had chosen not to pay.
And the most recent year?
I think for this current year.
Okay.
We've only been in operation since fall of 2020. So the first bills went out in 2021. So we're entering the third year of collection. And whether or not they've paid their previous years, I'm not sure. Since the number of farms relatively small, we're not subject to the same sort of privacy disclosures, I think, that the tax department is when we talk about taxpayers, but want to be sensitive to not disclosing individual parcel owners' financial situations.
The testimony then that you are recalling from another committee was not your testimony, was the testimony of farmers?
That's right.
Okay, who brought to the committee and declared on the record that they had not paid?
That's right.
Oh.
John?
How does it work with contiguous MS4 municipalities? So for example, stormwater calling on St. Albans City makes it to the lake through your town.
In other words, how is it assessed under the stormwater utility?
Yeah, like they're contributing to the work St. Albans town has to do, I would assume, in stormwater.
I mean, as far as I know, there's no coordination between the two stormwater utilities. They both do have stormwater utilities. We are limited in what we can do to assess. We can't, I don't think, assess entities in other towns for their contribution to our challenge. So we're limited in kind of the scope of what we can actually assess, which is why we've gone the direction of the impervious surface fee.
Did you have a chance before we started peppering you with questions to say everything you had wanted to say originally, Dylan?
Yeah, I think I just would reiterate that I think the bill as it came over from the Senate did provide the opportunity to kind of dig into some of these complexities without predetermining that any type of entity should be exempt. And having the relevant agencies, those that are in charge of making sure that our waterways are clean, and the agency tasked with supporting farmers are at the table hammering that out and bringing it back to the legislature. And if we determine that farms should be exempt, then certainly the legislature could move forward with something that's on the table today.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have, I don't know, do we have?
Be on his way.
Okay, all right. We have, the agency, Ag Agency is scheduled to testify next, and maybe we'll just take a short pause because.
Ryan or something?
Not sure who.
Oh.
Yeah.
Because I just had a question. Even Mike might know that if you're a non-active farm, I don't know
What about Mike?
Here goes our break.
I don't know what in Albans town considers active farms versus non-active, but non-active farms no longer have to be wraps, like production areas.
If you're not farming, you're not subject to the RAPs. So, and that means you have to hit the floor for what the RAPs are. And that's a relatively low floor. Like if you just have 5 horses, you're subject to the RAPs.
I was thinking a sort of double whammy for, say, you were a big dairy farm, cows were sold, went down the road, you have an empty manure pit.
Right.
That's impervious surface. You're paying a lot more for it.
Yeah, none of these ordinances, to my knowledge, say if you're not farming, you don't get assessed. You get assessed for the impervious surface that's on that parcel.
I think I think that active farm, the way that Dylan was using it, meant subject to the RAPs. Qualify for the 35% credit.
That's hard.
Yeah.
And some towns don't have a default farm credit because they all have their own ordinances. So for example, South Burlington, which doesn't have many farms, but has a couple, they don't have a farm credit. They have a general credit. And do any of you live in a town with a utility, stormwater utility? I do. I get a bill. There's nothing on that bill about this is how you apply for a credit.
And residents who are,
No, residents can't.
no matter what they do with the property.
If they're not eligible for a credit for residential property is not eligible for a credit.
Under the
South Burlington, yeah. In most bylaws that I've looked at.
And like the other thing, so if you destroyed your house, turned it into native grass as your plot, does the town know that and you will no longer be?
No, I'm still gonna it comes on my water bill regardless. And they've identified through, whatever mapping program tool they used, what was residential and what's not, and they assess.
But hypothetically, if you actually altered significantly the amount of impervious surface on your land, you would eventually be charged for the new amount of impervious surface on your land.
I think that's only if you expand over 2,700 square feet. I think that's when that would kick in. But if you're under 2,700 square feet, I think you just get the ERU.
Is 2,700 square feet the ERU in South Burlington?
Yeah.
I understand. I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, go.
Please.
No, it's okay. No, go.
I'm curious about any financial, and I believe this was brought up here, and I forget by who, and it might have been you. So if this does pertain to you, answer it. If it doesn't, sorry. But the costs that farms pay for impervious surfaces, they do pay something. I remember $1,500 a year comes to mind.
That's the medium farm general permit annual cost.
For storm water?
No, that's just their water quality permit. And then a large farm is 2,500 square feet. Then a farm has to implement the practices, which include ensuring that water, including stormwater, from the production area does not reach a surface water or groundwater. So that costs money.
Representative Supernath.
Farms are technically also eligible to apply for water quality grants, which can be up to $40,000 for non-point source pollution. And so I'm wondering if any of that grant funding could perhaps offset some of the fees that they're paying to municipalities or fees they're paying in general.
That's a good question. I don't think so, because most of the water quality grants are specific to a type of activity or a type of equipment. Like you get a grant for cover cropping, or you get a grant for a new manure applicator. You get a grant for an NRCS practice. I don't think you could just get a grant and use part of that to pay your stormwater fee.
Okay.
Mike, stand by if you're able, and we have Steve Collier from the Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets has asked to provide some additional testimony.
Good morning. Thank you. And I'm so sorry I wasn't here. I was planning to be here and I clicked on the streaming link for the House chamber and apparently it went to the wrong day. So I thought you were all in the chamber. Obviously you're not. So Steve Collier from the Agency of Agriculture. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here again. I'm very sorry I missed the lobbyist testimony from earlier this morning, so I'm not sure if anything was added, but I hope you'll ask me any related questions if anything was, because I have listened to what else has been provided. I really appreciate all the time you spent on this. Spent a lot of time on something that's we think is actually incredibly straightforward. So we appreciate that and really appreciate that you asked the questions, which are, your own attorney and our agency and A&R agree on what the law allows currently. And we suggested that you ask the towns for why they believe they have the authority to charge. And you've done that, which is instrumental. You always have to hear from both sides. What I've heard from the towns are a variety of claims. Two of them, to me, they're all really equitable claims to answer a legal question. And what I mean by that is they're saying it's fair to do it this way, which is irrelevant, honestly. I mean, when you're interpreting the law, when you're deciding how to make a policy, very important to determine what's fair. When you're interpreting existing law, it's what the law says, not what you want it to say. So a couple of the equitable arguments they're making is they're saying it's fair for everyone to pay. First of all, farmers are paying. They're paying a lot more than most people. So I don't find that argument to be very convincing, even if it was relevant. And it's not, because the question is what the law allows, not what you want to do. The other argument they've been saying is this is how they do it. Well, that's fine until you look at the law and then you realize you can't actually do it this way. So maybe you ought to reevaluate what you're doing. The law doesn't permit it. So to say you've done it this way is irrelevant. And honestly, like everyone's saying that the towns are doing it in good faith. And I've been feeling that way as well. But I'm starting to not feel that way quite as much because when you look at the law and you look at it carefully and you just keep saying we can do it, without saying how you can do it, at some point you go from not really carefully looking at your program and just asserting something that's no longer really has any basis. The two legal arguments I've heard, and again, please, if more have been advanced, I'd like to hear them. But one is, I've heard, I think this was from Burlington, is they're not regulating discharges. They're regulating impervious surfaces. So we'll get into that in a moment, but the only way that stormwater is regulated is by regulating impervious surfaces. There is no separation for that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we're looking at the law. The other argument that I've heard, and this one is a little bit astounding, is that we're not regulating, we're just charging a fee. And so we'll talk about that one a little bit too. And I printed out some statutory language that I'd like to go through with you if you don't mind, both for the A&R stormwater program and for the municipal authority. But just to remind us that towns are only authorized to do what you allow them. It's a Dillon's rule state. They can do what the legislature gives them authority to do. And A&R is the state designated entity to regulate stormwater. Towns can regulate it the same way that A&R does, and farm stormwater is exempt. That's our baseline. So towns can only do what you say they can do. A&R is the entity that you gave the authority to develop the program. Towns can take over for A&R if they want, but they have to do it the same way. Now, the claim that they're regulating discharges, and I'm sorry, they're only regulating impervious surfaces, that misunderstands the whole stormwater construct. There isn't any way to measure stormwater. It's, it rains, there's snow melt, there's a lot of stormwater. So there's this, basically impervious surfaces are a proxy to do that. Because the idea being that when you have an impervious surface, the water, the snow melt, instead of infiltrating into the ground and being filtered, it's running off. And so because you can't measure stormwater, there's a proxy to do that. You measure impervious surfaces. The idea being the more impervious surfaces you have, the more stormwater you're likely to create, the more runoff there's likely to be. And so through A&R's program, that's what they've developed. The only reason towns are measuring impervious surfaces is because that's what A&R developed. That's what they have to do. It's not that they're not measuring stormwater, it's that they're using the proxy that was created as a measure of stormwater. So this idea that it's not stormwater, it's impervious surfaces, this is the point. The point is when you measure impervious surfaces so you can get an idea of how much stormwater a farm or anyone else is creating. The other key that we've said now several times is the towns are following A&R's program. They're just ignoring the exemption. And I don't understand the rationale for that. When you have the authority to do what A&R does, that doesn't mean you have the authority to ignore the things A&R can't do. It's very clear, A&R does not regulate farm stormwater. It's clear because you put it in the law. The legislature put it in the law. So these towns are following A&R's stormwater program, just ignoring the exemption. That's not consistent. There's no way to construe that to be consistent. What I've heard from the towns is that they're focusing on their own needs, which are real. I mean, they have to manage stormwater. No one's suggesting that that's an easy task. No one's suggesting they might not need help with that task. No one's suggesting they shouldn't charge people. No one's suggesting they shouldn't charge farmers for their residences or for their other businesses that they have that might be development. But what they can't do is just ignore the law. And that's what's happening here, is they're just saying, we need the money. We want to treat everyone the same. Well, the thing is, farmers aren't the same. They're not treated the same under the law. And that's because they have their own separate requirements. They are required to manage their own stormwater. So treating them the same, it's not treating them the same. They're treating them differently because A&R can't regulate them because the farms already have to pay. And it's not about the fee. The fee that they pay for their MFO permit or their LFO permit, that's so we can regulate them. There's a cost to them, absolutely. But their real cost is in building this infrastructure to manage the stormwater. To store stormwater in a pit for 6 months, that's, from gathering all the water off your impervious surfaces, off your production area and having to store that for 6 months. Nobody else does that. And they store it. So then they spread it on their field. So that's where the real cost is. So towns are not treating them the same. They're treating them differently by charging them twice. It's not, if every homeowner was required to gather all the stormwater off their roof and stick it in an above ground pool in the backyard and then spread it on their field, those homeowners shouldn't be charged either, but they're not. Their water runs off their house, runs off their driveway, runs into the town system. That's fine, but farms can't do that. If they could do that, it would make sense to charge them a fee. If they could just allow all their stormwater to run off into the town system, that'd be way easier for them, much less expensive. Great, but we can't do that because there's potentially waste in that stormwater, and so they're not allowed to do it. So they're not treating them the same. The other thing that I still haven't heard the answer to is how the towns can claim they have more legal authority than A&R. A&R doesn't have this authority. Towns claim they do, but they don't say how. And that's the question. If you have more authority than the state designated entity, at least tell me how. And they haven't said that. What they have said in lieu of saying that is that a fee is not regulation. Well, the whole point of fees is you can't, it's kind of a fundamental construct of government that you can't charge a fee on anyone for anything unless you have the authority to regulate them. What would be the point of a fee unless you have some authority? So I'm a little bit shocked about this, the argument that we're going to charge a farmer a fee for how they use their land in the farming, but that's not regulation. So, and it's not regulating the required agricultural practices. How can that be? If a farm builds a new barn, they've got new impervious surfaces, the fee goes up. That's a form of regulation. It's like saying if we can charge a farmer to drive their tractor across the field when they're planting corn, We can charge them a fee for that because that's not regulating what they do. We just can't tell them how to plant the corn. Or we can charge a farmer for how many cows they have in their field or how many chickens they have in their chicken coop, as long as we don't tell them how many chickens they can have or how many cows they have. We're just charging them a fee. We're not regulating them. That just doesn't make any sense. And it's also not what the law says. The law is pretty clear in the municipal authority to enact bylaws that fees are a type of regulation. I mean, it says that right in the municipal bylaws, which I'll hand out in a second. So to argue a fee is not regulation when the law says exactly the opposite, I mean, it's not only counterintuitive to say that, it's just wrong. So I would like to pass out, if you don't mind, some of the definitions that are, I think, relevant to this whole issue, and there are not that many. Can you?
Yeah, of course.
Thanks.
Steve, a question?
Please.
So Steve, and I don't know if Mike or Dylan might want to add to this, but what's come up in testimony is that in the city of Burlington, UVM and the airport have their own small MS4 permits.
Yep.
So does that exempt them from the city of Burlington's own MS4 of charging them this all-in fee?
So if I'm understanding you right, Representative Bryan, you're saying that the town of Burlington is charging UVM and additional.
I'm saying they're not from what because under a small MS4 permit, UVM and the airport are obligated to do their own stormwater capital mitigation.
Thank you.
So to me, those are a little just kind of different questions. Because A&R has the authority to allow someone to have an MS4 permit. And that's an authority they have through the federal construct with the EPA. So if A&R is issuing an MS4 permit to UVM or to another entity.
They're small MS4s, which I don't.
Well, to me, that means that they're responsible for managing their own stormwater. And so they have to do it, and it's not up to the city of Burlington.
And so the city of Burlington then can't assess this all-in fee.
I don't know how they would. I mean, I haven't thought about that legally, but.
Let's keep the testimony just to Steve, and then you can have Mike come back.
Okay, I was coming around.
Yeah.
I was just saying, there's this synonymousness, if that's a word, between small MS4s because they're doing it themselves,
Right.
and RAPs because farms are doing this too.
And that's a great point. I don't know how that works, but it's possible that if the small MS4 is discharging to the Burlington, then there is a fee for that. But keep in mind, an MS4 permittee is not exempt under the law. Farms are exempt from NIPDs, which is one of the MS4 permits. Farms are exempt under statute, so that you can't really equate them to anyone else other than forestry practices, because forestry practices are also exempt under the law. So any argument that farms are like something else is missing the point, because the farms are subject to the RAPs, which we enforce, and they have to comply with the RAPs. And if they're doing that, they're not subject to additional municipal authority and regulation.
Giving benefit of the doubt to the townships participating in this, is there, in your legal opinion, any ambiguity in statute or room or need for clarification in statute for this subject?
No.
Okay.
I mean, to me, I was waiting for it. I expected to hear a legal argument that would point to different statutes, point to some implied authority, point to a different way where towns have to be able to.
What's that?
What's that?
Was there argument?
I haven't heard. No, that's what I expected to hear. Because remember, this committee's had this for 2-3 weeks. The league and others first appeared in January. So this is not new to them. I did expect there at some point, given their objection to it, for them to have a legal argument. I didn't expect it to be compelling, just because whenever you're looking at statutes, you look at the most specific language is the most important. So if you start pointing to other statutes where there's general authority, that doesn't hold much weight when you have a specific statute. And that's what we're going to talk about here in a second, is the specific statute. So I did think there would be a legal argument. To me, there isn't one. And that's not, we're the agency of agriculture. If it's our job to try to help you interpret the law. And if we want changes to the law, we come to you all the time and ask for changes to the law. We only asked for this change in the law because we didn't want to just tell people to sue. We didn't want to tell farms, just sue your towns because they're wrong. We tried talking to towns. Not every town, but we did reach out to towns, say, why are you doing this? We shouldn't be doing this, and they disagreed with us. So we could have just encouraged farms to sue, but we don't like to do that.
What's the change you're asking for?
Well, just what we've been asking for, and Mr. O'Grady has developed some language, is just a clarification so that so basically towns can't keep saying we can do this anyway.
So clarification is needed then?
I think it's important to do it given that towns won't stop.
Okay.
I don't think it should be required under the law. To me, the existing law is crystal clear that towns can't charge the stormwater fee for farm stormwater subject to the RAPs. But rather than suggesting to farms that they sue towns and get all their money back I just don't like litigation as a solution when there's a better one because it's costly. The only people who often win are the attorneys, which is fine, but it just would rather have the fix. So I do not think this clarification should be necessary, but towns aren't stopping. I mean, we're telling them and they keep coming in and saying we can do this. So at this point, I think the requested language change is really important because I think it needs to be clearer to the towns that the legislature has said you can't charge farms for their stormwater subject to the RAPs. So
everybody has something that just passed around, I think.
Yeah, so it's entitled Pertinent Municipal Farming Stormwater Statutory Provisions. Just please keep in mind, these are selected. I just selected this. There's huge chapters here. I just picked out the ones that I think are most helpful.
Sorry, just so that anybody watching might be able to look at the same document. Do we have a copy of this?
I'm sorry, I have an extra I can give you, but I do.
Later on, we'll just if you can send it electronically.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yep, I can do that. So the first bit is in Title 10, and this is 10 VSA 1264. And this is where the legislature gave A&R its authority over stormwater. So I just put this first paragraph, this 2064A. It's really just the underlying language I wanted to suggest you look at, which directs, and I'm looking now at the first underlying portion, which directs the Agency of Natural Resources to develop a process. And then further down, it just makes it clear that in furtherance of these purposes, which is stormwater management, the Secretary shall implement a stormwater program. So this is where stormwater management comes from. You gave it to A&R. And then I just put a couple of definitions in because I think it's really important to this argument. So under definitions, you see the definition of impervious surface is there, which we've talked about a lot. But then I think this one's important that we maybe haven't talked about, at least when I've been here, is regulated stormwater runoff. So not all stormwater runoff is regulated. And the definition says regulated stormwater runoff means precipitation snowmelt in the material dissolved or suspended in precipitation and snowmelt. And this is the underlying part that runs off impervious surfaces and discharges into surface water or into groundwater via infiltration. So just keeping in mind, this is what's regulated. Farms aren't allowed to do this. So when you think about why farms don't have to get a permit to do this, it's important to look at the definition. Regulated stormwater runoff is that runoff that makes it to surface water or groundwater. Farms under the RAPs aren't allowed to have their impervious surface runoff go into surface water or groundwater. They have to manage it. So it's all sort of logical when you look at it. The other thing that's really important, just because of this argument that the town has made that fees aren't regulation, is under the stormwater management chapter, stormwater impact fee is defined. And it says, as you can see, means the monetary charge assessed to a permit applicant. So the fee only goes to somebody who needs a permit for the discharge of regulated stormwater runoff. Again, that term, which means the stormwater runoff that you're discharging into surface or groundwater in order to mitigate the impacts that the discharger is unable to control. So the whole point of the fee is to pay for the stormwater you didn't control. Again, farms have to control their stormwater. So when you look at what's being regulated by A&R and what the fee applies to, you're supposed to, it makes sense why farms are exempt, right? Because they have to do it their own way and they can't just discharge it into the municipal system. Then I just repeated the exemption that we talked about a lot, but again, this is under the Stormwater Management Program. It says under the exemptions, no permit is required for A, stormwater runoff from farms in compliance with agricultural practices adopted by the Secretary of Agriculture, Food and Market. So here's the definition. There's a stormwater program that's set up, farms are exempt. This is the program that the towns have to apply. So just looking at the definitions, you don't have to get very far before you're saying, wait a second, why are the towns regulating impervious surfaces on farms and why are they charging them a fee? They don't even have authority under the definitions. Forget about the exemption, but you actually have a clear exemption which says farms can't be regulated. So I put in the next one, 1264B for the stormwater fund, just because it says pretty clearly in the underlined part, the fund shall consist of stormwater impact fees paid by permittees to meet applicable permitting standards for the discharges of regulated stormwater runoff. So again, the point is you're paying a fee when you are having runoff from your impervious surfaces that goes to surface water or groundwater. The next part I put in there because it's pretty interesting. You actually can get a refund under the state system, which towns have to follow. You can get a refund from your fee if you did not actually discharge any regulated stormwater runoff. So that's some of that underlying language. So not only is the fee only applicable to regulated stormwater runoff, which means discharges, but if it turns out you don't actually discharge, you can get a refund. So, I mean, not only should they not be charging the fee, but if the towns are complying with the RIPs, they obviously didn't have the discharges, so the farm should be getting a refund under the state program, which the towns are required to follow. So the next bit of the statutory language is so that's the state system under Title 10. Then there's Title 24, and that's where the towns come in, and that's just under the section that's underlined municipal bylaws. And I just put in the first section, 4301, because it's just where the section starts. But again, a couple of definitions here under 4303. First, what is a bylaw? It's a municipal regulation applicable to land development. And I highlighted regulation there because we're being told the fee is not regulation. So a bylaw is the only way that the towns can regulate, we'll get to that in a second, but the only way that towns can regulate stormwater is through a bylaw. And so this definition is making it clear that a bylaw is a regulation. I put land development in there. I didn't highlight anything, but just so you have the context of what land development is and what towns can regulate. The next section, subchapter 6, is about the implementation of a plan. So if towns adopt a plan, they have bylaws that can then implement the plan. And the reason I put this in is it talks about what the plan is for. I'll just quickly read it for anybody who's online. But any municipality that has adopted and has in effect a plan and has created a planning commission under this chapter may implement the plan by adopting, amending, and enforcing any or all of the regulatory and non-regulatory tools. I highlighted those two terms because they're further defined in a moment. So this is, if you're going to have a plan, this is how you do it. You can use these regulatory tools and non-regulatory tool that the legislature gave to towns. On the next page, under 4402, there's a section entitled Bylaws and Regulatory Implementation Tools. This then lists what the regulatory implementation tools are that a town can use to implement its bylaws. And you'll see that a municipality may adopt regulatory tools, including the following specific regulatory tools. And then in the list under number 6, it's impact fees. So the argument that a impact fee for stormwater is not a regulatory tool is pretty clearly dispelled by the language you put in the statute, which gives towns the ability to use impact fees to regulate to regulate land development as appropriate. Then under the next section, you see the non-regulatory implementation tools. I included that because there's no fees. under the non-regulatory tools, there's a list of things. None of them include establishing fees. So I think it's pretty clear that a fee is regulation. Then under the next subchapter, under bylaws, under section 4410, again, it says regulatory implementation of the municipal plan. And it says that a municipality that has adopted a plan through its bylaws may define and regulate land development. No argument there. If you have the authority, you can regulate land development and you do it through your bylaws. A little bit further down in that section, in the last sentence here, I underlined the section that says, however, no bylaws shall directly conflict with sections 4412 and 4413 of this title. And the reason I included 4413 of this title is because it's right below and it's directly applicable to this situation. And Mr. O'Grady has raised it several times with you all. It says there's a limitation on municipal bylaws is a bylaw under this chapter shall not regulate our required agricultural practices. So we've talked about a lot of ways which the stormwater program doesn't apply to farms, but here's this other very clear statement to towns: you can't regulate required agricultural practices. Now, if fee is not a regulation, maybe that works, but it's clear that a fee is a regulation. So a fee is included in a form of regulation. And this provision says towns, you can't do it. Then the next section, which is, I think, actually, it's more specific. So to me, it's even more important. It talks about these are the types of zoning regulations towns can do. That's why it's entitled zoning permissible types of regulations. This is section 4414. And this is where the towns have authority over stormwater. And it says any of the following types of regulations may be adopted by a municipality in its bylaws. And there's a whole list of them, but I just included number 9, which is the one that gives the towns the authority to have these MS4 permits. It's a stormwater management and control. Any municipality may adopt bylaws to implement stormwater management and control, and use the cute word, consistent with the program developed by the Secretary of Natural Resources pursuant to 10 VSA 1264. That's that program we started with.
Yeah.
So towns can do this, but they have to do it consistent with the program. There's nothing consistent about ignoring the exemptions in the program. That's inconsistent. So if you have a clear exemption in the program that you have to follow, you can't just pick and choose the parts you want to implement. You actually have to do it consistently. So thank you for giving me the time to go through that. I know it's a little onerous, and I'm sorry that, and I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you several times. I would just say that at this point, farms have, and I think it's clear to me, farms have been paying this fee for quite a long time, a fee they shouldn't be paying. And I would have been happy to have a study committee if there was an argument to study, but we're just talking about what the law says. We're not talking about if towns want to come and say, change the law. We think it should say something else. They can do that any session, but we don't need to study something that's clear. And it takes a lot of time to do that. And farms have been unjustly charged this fee for a long time. So we just really appreciate it if the legislature would just send that clear message to towns that you can't do this, and they can come back anytime and argue why farms should have to pay twice, in our opinion. But that's not the issue here. The issue here is, should they be charging now? The answer is no. So could we please make it clear so towns don't keep doing it? Please, thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions? I think you mentioned just now that towns have, that the agency has had a conversation in the past with some towns sharing the opinion, more or less, that you just shared with us. Has that been a conversation you've had directly, or somebody else in?
It's not been any conversation I've had. The only person I know for sure who's had some of those conversations is Ryan Patch, who you've heard for, and he's told me about them. And in talking through him is why we made this proposal, because we just weren't getting through. I don't know who exactly. I know it's more than one town. I think it's several, but and again, I always went a little hard on the towns there. It's not. I understand they have a hard job to do. That's why we didn't want them to get sued. I mean, they're part of government, just like we are, just like you are. We just want government to work correctly. So we don't want them to be sued, but we do want them to stop double charging farms.
I'm going to ask that we have our legal representative come up now, legislative counsel. We're glad to hear from the agency's perspective again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
But want to get maybe Mike O'Grady's reaction and hear if there's any. I guess I'll just start by asking: is there anything you just heard? You were here for that testimony, and I'm just wondering if there's anything that you heard that you disagree with or want to emphasize or respond to in any way.
You know, there are two arguments, really, effectively. There's the argument that Steve just laid out, that law is clear that you cannot regulate farms, municipalities, and you cannot regulate stormwater runoff from farms. The municipalities are focused on their authority. The other argument is the municipality's argument that the stormwater utilities authority, sewage authority, allows them to assess a fee basically for use of the system, and that there isn't any specific regulation of the property. It's just effectively a user fee. I tend to support Steve's argument more than the municipal argument, because the primary goal of any interpretation, statutory interpretation, usually by courts, but also by others, is to affect the intent of the legislature, is to do what the legislature intended. I really don't think, well, again, I don't like to opine on legislative intent because I've done it before and it's got me in trouble. But the question is, considering all of the statutes and authority that Steve just laid out for you and I've laid out for you before, did the legislature intend for a municipality not to have they cannot have a bylaw that regulates the building of a structure, that regulates the farming practices on the farm, that regulates the trucks on the farm? You know, did they intend to have that prohibition, but to allow a municipality to assess a fee on that farm for, even though they can't regulate anything else? I find that hard, difficult to see that the legislature intended that. And so municipalities obviously disagree. And we have been trying with all of the regulatory agencies, including DEC, talking to EPA to get to something where the regulatory agencies all agreed. I think the regulatory agencies can get there. I don't think the municipalities are ever going to agree that they should be accepted. I think they want to do what was pursued and ultimately enacted with AOT, is to have a credit, a statutorily mandated credit for farms. I think that that's what municipalities are. That's why they want to study. That's why they want to prolong. They want a credit. And I think the agency is asking for a full exemption. And you're the policymaker, and the whole argument that the farm can sue, a farmer's going to say, all right, do I hire an attorney that's going to cost me $5,000 just right off the top, just to get their services, maybe more, depending on who the attorney is. And that attorney is quickly going to exceed $5,000 to $10,000 in costs in the preparation for litigation. And if the litigation is ongoing, then it's probably going to exceed $30,000 to $50,000 quickly. And so the farmer going to pay, I'm going to take $30,000 to $50,000 to litigate this $10,000 fee that I'm getting every year. And plus I have to take all my time because I'm going to have to go to these litigations, proceedings as well. I find it, I think some farms could do that. Some of the larger farms are but have a lot of people that work on them. The farm in East Montpelier, they have like 7 cousins and siblings that all live together and work on the farm. Like one of them be like, yeah, I'll do the litigation, But I don't think other farms would.
What about small claims? Where you don't have to hire a lawyer, but.
I'd have to look at that. I don't know much about the scope of their jurisdiction. I know that there's a monetary threshold. I know it's civil. I know it's usually pro se where you don't have an attorney. But I don't know. That's basically all I know.
John?
If you could walk me through this example, it might help me. So say there are 2 contiguous municipalities, right? One has this MS4, decided to go with an MS4 because it's really the municipality's choice, right, whether they do it or not. They have this utility and they have this all-in philosophy. Next door is a town that's not MS4, but still in the TMDL, say like Champlain. What are those? Are their obligations in the non-MS4 town the same as far as the sort of capital improvements they have to make under A&R?
There are some things that are the same, but there are other things that are not. All towns in the state have to comply with the municipal roads general permit, which is a stormwater permit. So both,
you're in a TMDL or not, right?
Whether you're in a TMDL or not. So those 2 towns will have the same municipal roads general permit. All of those towns are subject to the state stormwater operating permit as well. So if they have impervious surface over a certain amount and they're developing it or redeveloping or expanding it, they'll all have to do lines with the operating permit.
Which is.
And then they all.
A&R?
Yeah. And then if they both have wastewater treatment facilities, then they both need to get discharge permit for those wastewater treatment facilities. And that's pretty much where it ends. Then if you're an MS4, you have additional stormwater management requirements. And you've heard the municipality say there's 7 requirements, and it's things like street sweeping, catch basins, doing education. I don't remember the other 4.
Something about ditches.
Yeah, cleaning ditches, right? So that's the additional requirements in the MS4. Yeah.
And that's solely where the fees should go, according to the municipalities.
Well, then when the stormwater utility adopts its authority, and the fee, it's for the management of the stormwater utility. So if you're in a MS4 town, what the stormwater fee is for is all the things that the stormwater utility does. And I don't know where some of these towns draw the line between it's under the MS4, it's not under the MS4. But it's supposed to be for the stormwater services.
Because I think.
Although the stormwater truck plows the South Burlington Road, so I don't really know how that works. But in the non-MS4 town, they can have a utility. It still has to be used for stormwater, but they're not implementing MS4. Like you can have a stormwater utility in a non-MS4 town. But then it's about managing the stormwater and what the utility wants to do. It's not about complying with the MS4.
And there, can you assess fees then for that?
Yes.
And A&R money for the stormwater permits, does that cycle back to a lot of these municipalities?
No.
It doesn't.
No, the stormwater permitting fee, permit fees go into the environmental permit fund that are used for the cost of the agency. And there's actually a definition in statute about what state fees are. And the monetary charge, oh, that's not the right one. I know it is. The monetary charge by an agency for a service or product provided to or the regulation of specified classes of individuals or entities. That's what state agencies get to charge a fee for, a service or the regulation of.
Because what I was getting at here is the non-MS4 municipalities that are dealing with A&R, not doing it themselves. A&R.
No, they're doing it themselves. Non-MS4 are doing it themselves.
They are too.
Yeah.
And yet none of those towns have fees for active farms.
I don't know if there really are any utilities in non-MS4 towns. I don't know of any.
Or whether they're assessing fees on
Right.
their services.
Right.
But A&R certainly has always said, we can assess that fee the way MS4 towns are. They're not like, you're a non-MS4 town, you're under our jurisdiction.
A&R clearly does not have jurisdiction over stormwater on farms unless that stormwater is discharged to a surface water. And then that's a surface water discharge and A&R has authority over that.
Steve was mentioning in here that there's language regarding refund. Could you cover that a little bit if there's overpayment?
Could I say?
Yeah, yes.
It's just.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's not really done.
Okay.
That's a little antiquated.
Really done this work.
The refunding.
Where's
What?
It's 10 VSA 1264B. So basically, you're never gonna, if you're subject to a permit, it means that you are developing new impervious surface or expanding new impervious surface or redeveloping impervious surface. And when you get your operating permit, you meet the A&R Stormwater Management Manual. And when the manual was first introduced way back in like 2004, it was determined that you could really only control, I'm gonna mess you all up. The manual uses a surrogate because I think it might have been Steve said earlier, you can't really measure stormwater, so they have to measure something. And so what they measure is sediment. It's the sediment and your stormwater is the surrogate. And so back in 2004, they were like, oh, you can only really control up to 80% of the sediment and your stormwater. So you would implement the manual, and then there would be something that you would do to get to complete the remaining 100%. And that would be pay the stormwater impact fee, or do something what's called an offset, which is a project audit that you would do to reduce 20% of sediment, et cetera. And those impact fees were going into this fund. But the manual has been revised, and most recently you can get more. You can almost get to 100%, but there's still something that's coming off of that property. So I really don't think there are that many times when a refund is actually, it's theoretically possible, but I don't think it's actually practically implemented.
So the refund is for that additional 20% on top of the 80.
No, it would be a refund for whatever impact fee that you have paid. But if you have implemented enough measures on your property to control 95% or more of the sediment, then you're probably not paying that big of an impact fee, if anything.
Shouldn't be.
Probably what you do is you buy like some trees and give them to the municipality for planting in a riparian buffer or something like that. That's probably enough of an offset to get you your rest of the way there.
So we're nearing 12, and we've been looking at a lot of dense legal language, and maybe some people's attentions are starting to flag. So I just wanted to bring this back to the amendment that we looked at earlier this week. Did we actually look at it at one point this week?
Yeah, we looked at it one time.
Okay. So that was the one dated April 24th. That, if I remember incorrectly, just to paraphrase it or summarize it, essentially clarifies. So to your question, Dave, earlier about, do we need to clarify? This amendment would say, yes, apparently we feel we do need to clarify, or we want to clarify the intent and spell it out. Then the second piece is saying, but no town shall be required to refund any money that's already been paid. So that left the question, you'll remember, of what does that mean for farms that haven't paid, that, were sent a bill but haven't paid. And one interpretation of that, and I don't know if this is an accurate or supportable legally, but one interpretation might be it's silent on what happens in that case, and that if the town wants to pursue legal action, they can, and if the farmer wants to pursue legal action, they can. But we're only saying this is the town doesn't have the authority to send to charge anybody, or the towns don't have authority to charge anybody going forward, but we're not going to make them pay back what they've gotten. I think that summarizes what the language says.
And there's a good legal argument that if you leave it silent, that it won't apply to those previously assessed fees, and those people will still, it's when you enact laws, they apply prospectively, they apply into the future. They don't apply retroactively unless you say they apply retroactively. And by being silent on whether it's retroactive or not, it will only apply prospectively. Consequently, a municipality can interpret it and say, oh, prior to this date, I had authority and I could assess you, and you are still liable for that payment.
by including the language, we're not being silent, we're saying municipalities don't have to repay. But does it still leave open the question of what about?
I really don't think it does because you're clearly, if you adopt or enact what has been proposed or some form of that, you're saying into the future municipalities do not have the authority. And a court would look at that and say, well, they felt they needed to do that in order to be clear and about municipal authority. And before that, municipal authority wasn't clear. So the municipality had, that's, I think, generally what a court would do if you enacted that language.
So, Rodney.
Question of verification. Both the agency and ag and A&R are good with this language.
Well, what they, yes, generally, yes. Could the language be improved to address some of the issues that were raised by some of the witnesses? Yes. I think you could, one of the witnesses said, oh, well, the fee that the language says that there shall now be fee on discharges of ag waste or ag non-point source pollution. And that's not what we put our fee on. We put our fee on impervious surface. Well, that's what Steve and I originally said, right? And then A&R is like, no, we want it to be tied to what the RAPs regulate. And that's what the RAPs regulate. They regulate agricultural waste and agricultural non-point source. We can massage this language so that it's no fee on impervious surface on parcels that are regulated under the RAPs for ag discharges or ag non-point source. And I think A&R would agree with that.
It's just moving a clause.
It's just really going back to the language Steve and I wanted to begin with.
John?
That's just what I was wondering is, what is the difference between those articles that were, or chapters of this bill as introduced that we saw before changes were made and the amendment you came in with the other day?
Well, the bill is introduced, the language is introduced. It could be read as being more expansive than just the assessment of a fee. It could have been read as the municipality had really no authority at all over like a farm, like any authority. And it was South Burlington, one of the people from South Burlington made the argument that the language needed to be revised, and I generally agree with what they said. It could have been interpreted too broadly.
So we could make that revision and still satisfy the concerns that were raised and then raised over there.
Yeah.
There and then addressed here earlier.
Yeah, I think with some slight revision, you can get back to, you can address the municipality's concerns, still address, like, say, South Burlington's concern about the original language being brought up, and hopefully address what A&R's concerns were. I think we can do that.
I think it's critical that we continue to address A&R's concerns, or else that's gonna come back to bite us
somewhere.
I do want to say, with regard to A&R input and even EPA's input, this isn't saying the language that you had in front of you is they shall not charge a farm a fee. It's not saying that impervious surface is never going to be part of the MS4. It's not saying it's a fee. The municipalities already changed their fees, with their credits and off. They're already doing whatever they want with their fees. It's just saying that in this case, this entity doesn't have a fee. It's not changing the MS4's authority anyway. It's not changing the MS4 permit. It's just saying that they don't have a fee. Which municipalities, they're already reducing fees. The airport, UVM, they do get assessed a fee, but they immediately get a special credit.
So let me just ask the committee before we break, sort of directionally, so we can work on fine tuning this language and making sure that everybody in the administration is comfortable with it, making sure that it addresses that particular concern that came up from testimony from one of the municipalities, and still lays out clearly that you won't be doing this going forward. Does anybody have, so let me just pause there and say whether anybody has concerns about if we move ahead in that direction, or feel like we need to discuss it more.
Move forward in what direction? I'm sorry.
So the amendment, that two-page amendment that's dated April 24th, tweaking the language slightly to address, I think, just a concern that came up this week, a point that was raised by one of the municipalities saying, just want to flag this. It's not about, not really arguing the other larger point that we're talking about, but just saying, I think this language may have an unintended consequence. Shift a couple of words here and from here to here. We're going to ask Mike to do that. We're going to be sure that it still satisfies A&R, as this amendment does. I mean, I think this is really important to emphasize. This doesn't always happen. That the Agency of Agriculture and the Agency of we don't want to lose sight of the fact that it doesn't always happen and has happened here, and we don't want to lose that agreement to satisfy an outside concern. So that's doing that, leaving everything else the same. And and again, what this amendment does is say, going forward, we're clarifying, to your earlier point, we're clarifying the existing law so that there isn't any room for ambiguity going forward.
Good with that, to move forward with that tweak. There you go. Yay or nay.
We're not going to yay or nay right now, but okay, good to know.
But I'm ready to roll.
My two thoughts on moving forward would be to make maybe some additional clarification that the towns can still assess the living structures on the farm. And then in addition, and this is a bit of a stretch.
Hang on, before you say the in addition part.
Yes.
Does the language already is?
It would already do that.
It would already do that. By how?
The house is not subject to the RAP.
Okay.
And they would still continue to be assessed.
I mean, is that deduced or is it clearly explicitly spelled
It's
out?
basically under the RAPs.
Okay.
The house, the domicile is not part of the farm.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you, Dave.
And then the other addition would be, earlier I was proposing that we give a refund, and I see in retrospect that may not be what would work. But perhaps we should attribute what was already paid into the coffers retrospectively forward to a credit towards payments for the house. Meaning that if the house has to pay $50 to $60 a year into this fund, maybe that should come from past payments already made.
Then you're gonna be starting a whole nother argument.
Yeah.
Do you think? What would that argument be? I'm curious. What am I missing?
Then the municipalities can say, sorry to assess house.
Keep it.
If they do.
Well, they've always had authority to assess the house, but that's not the farm.
And then they say, so we don't wanna give them credit.
But if we say they do, then that's the final word. We have authority.
But the house has already been assessed throughout the whole time. So the house and the farm are separate entities. They're taxing, they're charging a fee to the farm, but the house is paying its own fee
So
already. So
could the overpayment of the farm, that credit then go to the house?
they've already paid it.
Into the future, they haven't paid it.
Oh,
Next year comes.
I don't think that's gonna.
Why? I mean, where is my logic wrong here?
There's a Vermont expression called keep it simple, stupid. And we got the simplest, with a little tweak, we can move out of this and maybe there's some other things we could take. If we start moving pieces around the chessboard, it just, I think we'll be here for a year or something. Or it'll die.
I don't think you meant to accuse.
No, I didn't take it that way. And if it was, sometimes I am. But that's why I'm checking.
No, I'm not.
No, and I'm not taking it that way.
The chairman narrowed all this 2 weeks of work down to one tweak by our council. And I thought that was brilliant. And that moves us on. If we end up in the Vermont Supreme Court, how we do.
Well, then if that's the way the rest of the body feels, I agree with the body. But I just want to put that stipulation out there that from my sense of justice, I don't think this is fair. Okay. I think that there's been an overpayment, an egregious overpayment, and I don't think that's fair.
So, right, I think that what you're saying is you aren't entirely on board with the prospective only aspect of the language. And so that's something maybe there's another way to address that, or maybe we all collectively feel that that's,
Have to go draft something for environment and energy by 1 o'clock.
Yeah, I want to just make sure that before the rest of us go, thank you, Mike. And I'm going to, in a moment, say, think about this and we'll come back after lunch, but go ahead, Ronnie. You guys.
I just want to say, it's like playing poker. Sometimes you gotta know when to hold them and when to.
Yeah.
Know when to walk away, know when to run.
I'm walking through that.
Even though it doesn't seem fair, but if we got to this agreement.
We got something.
I think Rodney,
We could stop them from doing it in the future.
Bigger picture, yeah.
Let's go with that.
So the thing that I just wanted to add before we go, and we haven't talked about it all this morning, is, and it's not in the amendment, is the study piece. So if we've said this doesn't work, going forward, you can't do it, is there still something to study? And what would that be? So